My Denver flight got canceled, so I drove 6 hours through the night to surprise Eleanor. Instead, I found my son Michael laughing in our living room while my wife crawled to the outdoor faucet for water. Her walker lay sideways on the patio tiles like she'd collapsed trying to reach it. Michael was toasting something with wine, completely unaware I was watching. Eleanor looked up at me with eyes I didn't recognize, confused, ashamed, desperate. 38 years building a real estate empire, and I'd never seen a puzzle this twisted. Let me tell you what a canceled flight taught me about family, and how sometimes the people you trust most are the ones you should fear. 6 weeks earlier, Eleanor had her hip replacement surgery. The titanium joint cost us $12,000 out of pocket, but money wasn't the issue. Recovery was. She needed the walker for at least 3 months, maybe longer. At 64, my wife had always been fiercely independent. Watching her struggle with simple tasks like reaching the kitchen faucet broke something in me I didn't know could break. I'd built Patterson Development Group from nothing. Started in 1987 with a single strip mall in Tucson, turned it into 23 commercial complexes across Arizona and Nevada. Our net worth sat comfortably at $12.5 million, most of it tied up in real estate holdings. Not bad for a kid who grew up in a double-wide in Yuma. Michael, our only son, had always been complicated. 35 years old, still finding himself. He'd bounced between marketing jobs, tried his hand at day trading, even spent 2 years selling insurance. Nothing stuck. Jessica, his wife of 4 years, worked as a nurse practitioner. They lived in a rented townhouse 15 minutes away, visited every Sunday for dinner, seemed like a normal young couple figuring life out. The first red flag came 3 weeks after Eleanor's surgery. Michael stopped by on a Tuesday afternoon while I was at the office reviewing contracts for a new shopping center in Henderson. When I got home, Eleanor mentioned he'd been asking questions about our living situation. "He's worried about us managing this big house," she said, settling into her recliner with a wince. Asked if we'd ever considered assisted living. Our house wasn't mansion-sized, but it was substantial. 4 bedrooms, 3.5 baths, 2,800 square feet on 2 acres in North Scottsdale. We'd bought it in 1998 for $400,000. Today's market put it around $2.8 million. The mortgage had been paid off for a decade. Assisted living? I'd laughed. You're recovering from surgery, not developing dementia. But Michael's concern kept escalating. He started dropping by more frequently, always when I wasn't home. He'd find Eleanor struggling with something, reaching a high shelf, carrying laundry upstairs, getting in and out of the shower, and suggest maybe it was time to consider professional care. Jessica joined the campaign 2 weeks later. She'd arrive with medical pamphlets about senior living communities, statistics about fall risks in large homes, stories from work about elderly patients who'd waited too long to move into facilities. "We just want what's best for you both," she'd say, squeezing Eleanor's hand with practiced nurse compassion. The Denver trip had been planned for months. Water rights litigation involving one of our commercial properties near Lake Mead. The case was worth potentially $2 million in future development rights, so I'd planned to stay through the weekend, maybe play some golf, visit with my attorney's family. Then Continental Airlines decided weather in Denver was too risky for landing. They offered to rebook me for Sunday, but something nagged at me. Call it instinct. Call it 38 years of reading people's intentions in business deals. I rented a Ford Explorer and drove the 6 hours home through Friday night darkness. I'd called Eleanor around 9 p.m. from Flagstaff to let her know I was coming home early. The phone rang 12 times before going to voicemail. Not unusual. She often turned the ringer off when her hip pain flared up and she took the prescription sleeping pills. The garage door opener worked perfectly. My keychain felt familiar in the deadbolt. Everything seemed normal until I heard that laughter from the living room. Not Eleanor's laugh. Michael's. Deep, satisfied. The kind of laugh that comes from getting away with something. The water meter told the first story. I'd installed enough commercial properties to read utility infrastructure like a road map. Our meter sat in a concrete box near the street, protected by a lock only the utility company and property owner should have keys to. The lock was gone. The valve handle had been turned to the quarter-open position. Our normal water pressure ran at 68 psi. Quarter open meant maybe 15 psi, enough to keep pipes from bursting, but not enough for comfortable living. Someone with knowledge of utility systems had done this deliberately.
Inside the house, I tested every faucet. Kitchen sink, weak dribble, master bathroom, barely enough pressure to brush teeth. Guest bathrooms, same story. But the outdoor spigot, the one where I'd found Eleanor kneeling like an animal, ran full pressure. It was connected to a separate line that bypassed the main valve. Michael's laugh got louder. I could hear Jessica's voice now too, talking about Florida communities and resort-style amenities. They were in our living room, drinking our wine, planning our future. I found the utility bills in my home office. 3 weeks of unopened mail, neatly stacked. The water bill showed normal usage through Eleanor's surgery date, then a dramatic drop. 2,200 gallons in the first week of November, down to 400 gallons the week I left for Denver. Someone who understood utility billing had been managing this reduction carefully, keeping usage just high enough to avoid triggering automatic shut-off warnings. Eleanor's diary sat on her nightstand, open to recent entries. Her handwriting looked shakier than usual. November 15th. Keep forgetting to drink enough water. Feel confused about simple things. Maybe Michael is right about needing help. November 18th. James leaves tomorrow for Denver. Feel dizzy. Hard to get to kitchen for water. Michael says this proves I'm not safe alone. November 19th. So thirsty, but water pressure very low. Must be pipes getting old like me. The assisted living brochures were stuffed in Michael's car console. I found his Toyota Camry unlocked in our driveway, engine still warm. Sunset Manor, Premier Senior Living. The deposit receipt was dated November 8th, 6 days before Eleanor's first diary entry about feeling confused. $5,800, paid by check from Michael's personal account. But the real evidence was in Jessica's purse. She'd left it on our kitchen counter while they celebrated in the living room. Her phone contained 17 video recordings, all from the past 3 weeks. Eleanor struggling to open a water bottle. Eleanor confused about which pills to take. Eleanor falling asleep at the kitchen table after barely eating. Each video was carefully edited, removing any context about the water pressure issues or Michael's presence during these incidents. The timestamps showed they were taken during my business meetings, when I couldn't witness Eleanor's actual condition. At the bottom of Jessica's purse, I found Thomas Bradley's business card. He'd been Michael's roommate at Arizona State, now practiced elder law in Phoenix. Someone had written on the back, "Competency evaluation, 72 hours notice required." The timeline crystallized. 3 weeks of systematic torture disguised as natural decline. Recorded evidence of Eleanor's resulting confusion and weakness. A medical professional willing to testify about her inability to live independently. A deposit already paid at an expensive facility. A lawyer ready to file guardianship papers. I climbed the stairs to our bedroom and opened Eleanor's jewelry box. The diamond tennis bracelet I'd given her for our 35th anniversary was missing. Her grandmother's pearl necklace, gone. The Rolex watch from our 25th anniversary, nowhere to be found. They weren't just planning to warehouse Eleanor in assisted living. They were liquidating her personal assets piece by piece, building a case that she was losing valuable items due to dementia-related carelessness. In Michael's childhood bedroom, I found a banker's box hidden in the closet. Inside, photocopies of our property deeds, trust documents, insurance policies, and bank statements. Someone had been studying our financial structure for months, identifying which assets would transfer to Eleanor's care and which would become available to family members managing her affairs. The cruelest detail was a printed email exchange between Michael and a contact at Sunset Manor. They discussed Eleanor's aggressive tendencies and resistance to family guidance. The facility director recommended a higher level of care and a higher monthly fee to manage her difficult personality. They'd been setting up justification for keeping Eleanor in lockdown conditions, away from any outside contact who might question the narrative they were building. Michael wasn't just stealing our money, he was stealing Eleanor's dignity, her autonomy, her final years of independence. He was convincing her that her own body and mind were failing when the only thing failing was his moral compass. Catherine Wells had been our estate planning attorney for 12 years. I called her cell phone at 6:30 Saturday morning, knowing she'd answer because her retainer agreement included emergency access for situations involving elder abuse or family disputes over assets. "James, is everything all right? You sound different." I need you to walk me through how someone would execute a guardianship takeover of Eleanor and myself, hypothetically. Catherine's silence lasted 10 seconds. That's very specific. What's happened? I explained the water pressure, the recordings, the assisted living deposit, Thomas Bradley's involvement. Catherine asked me to photograph everything and email it to her secure server immediately. This is textbook elder abuse with intent to defraud, she said. The good news is it's also incredibly stupid. Michael's created a paper trail that will destroy him in court. While I documented evidence, Catherine researched Michael's financial situation through professional networks. The results arrived in my email an hour later. Michael owed $380,000 to various creditors, student loans, credit cards, and, this was the devastating detail, $200,000 to an offshore gambling website based in Costa Rica. The gambling debt explained everything. Michael wasn't just struggling with normal financial pressures. He was in trouble with the kind of people who don't accept payment plans or bankruptcy discharge. He needed large amounts of cash immediately, and our estate represented his only accessible source. Thomas Bradley's law firm specialized in what they called compassionate family transitions. Their website featured testimonials from families who'd made the difficult but necessary decision to provide professional care for aging parents. The average case involved assets between $1 and $5 million. Their fee structure was percentage-based, 15% of total estate value managed during guardianship proceedings. Eleanor and I were worth exactly the kind of money that made guardianship fraud profitable. Catherine explained the typical timeline. File for emergency competency evaluation claiming immediate safety risks. Use medical evidence of confusion and physical decline. Get temporary guardianship within 72 hours. Move the elderly person to a facility where they have no outside contact. Liquidate assets to pay for care while family members gradually transfer wealth into personal accounts. How long before it becomes irreversible? 90 days. After that, proving the elderly person was competent becomes nearly impossible. The isolation and institutional living create genuine cognitive decline that supports the original fraud. Michael had been executing a month-long plan to steal our life's work and destroy Eleanor's remaining independence, but he'd made critical mistakes. Property developers understand complex legal structures because real estate deals involve multiple layers of contracts, regulations, and potential disputes. I'd spent 38 years learning how to protect assets from people who wanted to take them. Catherine and I spent Saturday afternoon crafting a response that would turn Michael's legal strategy into a weapon against him. We started with the easiest targets. Utility tampering is a felony in Arizona, carrying mandatory jail time and civil penalties up to $50,000 per incident. The recordings Jessica made could be used to prove intentional creation of evidence for fraud purposes, but the real power play would come from the trust structures I'd built to protect our wealth from lawsuits, creditors, and family disputes. Eleanor and I held our assets through an irrevocable trust established in 2019, with Catherine as trustee and specific provisions preventing family members from claiming inheritance rights until both grantors were deceased. Michael didn't understand that our house, investment accounts, and business interests weren't owned by James and Eleanor Patterson. They were owned by the Patterson Family Trust, managed by a professional fiduciary, with distribution rules that couldn't be altered by guardianship proceedings or family pressure. Even if Michael succeeded in getting guardianship, he'd control two people with no legal access to the money he's trying to steal, Catherine explained. He's planning a bank robbery at an empty vault. Sunday morning, I received the most damning evidence yet, a voicemail on our home phone from someone named Carlos, speaking with a slight accent and asking Michael to call back about your payment timeline. The message included a reference to your family's situation in Arizona and hoped Michael was making progress on the real estate solution. The offshore gambling debt wasn't just financial pressure. Someone in Costa Rica was tracking Michael's efforts to liquidate our assets. This wasn't family greed anymore. This was international fraud with professional criminals monitoring our household for payment purposes. That afternoon, Catherine filed papers with the Maricopa County Adult Protective Services requesting an immediate investigation into financial abuse of elderly persons. We included photographs, recorded evidence, utility bills, and financial records showing the pattern of systematic manipulation. Monday morning, I activated what Catherine called the nuclear option. 38 years building commercial properties teaches you that the most effective defense is controlling the infrastructure your enemies depend on. First call. Arizona Public Service, our electricity provider. I donated $43,000 to their public safety foundation over the past decade and served on their commercial customer advisory board. When I explained that someone had tampered with utility services to create evidence of elderly neglect, their security director agreed to meet me that afternoon. Within 2 hours, APS investigators photographed the compromised water meter, tested pressure levels throughout our property, and documented evidence of systematic utility manipulation consistent with elder abuse patterns. Their report would become evidence in both criminal and civil proceedings. Second call. Daniel Murphy, our homeowners association president. Daniel managed HOA compliance for Whispering Hills, our exclusive neighborhood where property values started at $2 million and HOA violations could trigger mandatory mediation or forced sales. I'd helped Daniel's construction company win the contract for our community pool renovation 3 years earlier. Daniel, I need you to drive past our house and document any violations of HOA property maintenance standards. Someone's been creating artificial evidence of decline. By Tuesday morning, Daniel's official HOA inspection report cited 14 violations of community standards, damaged mailbox post, unwatered landscaping, accumulated newspapers, automotive fluids in the driveway, and general appearance of property neglect inconsistent with neighborhood character. The violations weren't real. Eleanor and I maintained our property meticulously, but they matched exactly the kind of evidence Michael would need to prove we couldn't handle independent living. Daniel's report established that these problems had appeared suddenly in the past 3 weeks, coinciding with Michael's increased visits. Catherine, meanwhile, worked her magic with legal documentation. She drafted new trust amendments, removing Michael's power of attorney authorization, revoked his emergency contact status with our banks and medical providers, and updated our will to exclude anyone who attempts to fraudulently obtain guardianship or assisted living placement against our expressed wishes. The trust changes were retroactively effective to November 1st, meaning any financial moves Michael planned would be automatically invalid. Our assets were now protected by what Catherine called fortress-level security. Wednesday, I implemented what military strategists call controlled information warfare. I left documents where Michael would find them during his next visit. Bank statements showing a fake account with $800,000 in cash, property appraisals for land in Nevada worth $3.2 million, and medical records indicating Eleanor's hip recovery was exceeding expectations. The bait worked perfectly. Thursday afternoon's security camera footage showed Michael photographing these documents while Eleanor napped. He spent 47 minutes in my office, carefully copying account numbers and property information. That evening, he called Eleanor with renewed urgency about assisted living. "Mom, I've been thinking about your safety. What if something happens when Dad's traveling? You could fall, hurt yourself worse, and nobody would know for hours." Eleanor, who still didn't know about the water pressure manipulation, agreed to visit Sunset Manor on Saturday just to see the facilities. Michael scheduled the tour for 2 p.m., right when I had a standing golf appointment he'd observed for months. Friday morning brought the most satisfying phone call of my career. Thomas Bradley's office called Eleanor to schedule her voluntary competency evaluation for the following Tuesday. The appointment was necessary, they explained, to establish baseline cognitive function before any major lifestyle transitions. Eleanor, confused and scared, agreed to the evaluation. She still believed Michael was acting out of love. I spent Friday afternoon with Catherine, finalizing what we called Project Mirror, a systematic reversal of every tactic Michael had used against us. If he wanted to play games with utility services, we'd show him how professionals handle infrastructure warfare. Saturday arrived like Christmas morning. At 11 a.m., while Michael and Jessica prepared for the Sunset Manor tour, Maricopa County Adult Protective Services arrived at our door with a court order for immediate welfare checks on both Eleanor and myself. I'd scheduled this visit for maximum psychological impact. APS investigator Maria Gonzalez was a 20-year veteran who'd seen every variety of elder abuse,
She photographed Eleanor's physical condition, tested our water pressure, reviewed utility bills, and interviewed Eleanor privately about any pressure she'd felt from family members regarding living arrangements. Eleanor's answers were heartbreaking. Michael says I'm becoming a burden. Says James works too hard taking care of me. Maybe they're right. I do feel confused lately. Maria's report, completed while Michael and Jessica waited in our driveway, concluded, evidence strongly suggests systematic manipulation of utilities and deliberate isolation tactics consistent with financial abuse patterns. Recommend immediate protective measures and criminal investigation. At 12:30, Phoenix Police Detective Sarah Chen arrived with a warrant to investigate utility tampering. Detective Chen specialized in fraud cases targeting elderly victims. She'd built a reputation for thorough documentation and aggressive prosecution. By 1 p.m., our front yard looked like a crime scene. Police cars, APS vehicles, utility company trucks, and HOA compliance officers created exactly the kind of public spectacle that destroys property values and neighborhood reputations in communities like Whispering Hills. Michael's Toyota Camry sat in our driveway while he and Jessica watched their carefully planned fraud unravel in real time. Neighbors gathered on sidewalks, taking photographs, sharing gossip about that situation at the Patterson house. The most beautiful detail was Detective Chen's interview with Eleanor. After 20 minutes of gentle questioning, Eleanor began to understand what had been happening to her. The confusion, the weakness, the feelings of inadequacy, all results of systematic manipulation designed to make her doubt her own competence. Mrs. Patterson, when did you first notice the water pressure issues? I thought it was normal aging. Michael said old houses have problems. Did anyone suggest you might be forgetting to drink enough water? Michael and Jessica, they said I was getting forgetful about self-care. But you were actually unable to access adequate water pressure for basic needs. The moment Eleanor realized she'd been tortured by her own son was visible in her expression. Confusion gave way to hurt, then to anger, then to something harder and colder. At 1:45 p.m., 15 minutes before the Sunset Manor tour, Detective Chen arrested Michael for utility tampering, elder abuse, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Jessica was arrested for conspiracy and evidence tampering related to the recordings on her phone. The handcuffs clicked shut on Michael's wrists at exactly 1:47 p.m. I was standing in our kitchen, watching through the window as our neighbors recorded everything on their phones. 38 years building a reputation in this community, and my son had turned our home into the neighborhood scandal. Detective Chen read Michael his rights while Jessica sobbed in the back of a patrol car. The Sunset Manor tour would happen without them. Dad, this is insane. I was trying to help you both. Mom's been confused, forgetting things. You can't see it because you're never here. Michael, I know about the water valve. I know about the gambling debt. I know about Carlos calling from Costa Rica. His face went pale. What are you talking about? I pulled out my phone and played Carlos's voicemail on speaker. Michael's expression shifted from confusion to panic to something that looked like relief. At least the lies were over. $380,000 to offshore gambling sites. $200,000 to people who don't forgive debt. You needed our house to save your life. Detective Chen took notes while I explained Michael's financial situation. Jessica's nurse practitioner license would be suspended pending investigation. Michael's job at the marketing firm would disappear once they learned about the arrests. Their entire life was collapsing in real time. Mr. Patterson, we'll need your detailed statement about the utility manipulation and financial planning you discovered, Detective Chen said. This case will likely involve federal charges due to the interstate gambling debt and systematic fraud patterns. Eleanor had been silent throughout the arrests, sitting in her chair with the walker beside her, watching her son destroy his future. When the police cars finally left, she looked at me with eyes I'd never seen before. How long have you known? Since Friday night when I found you at the water spigot. And you let me think I was losing my mind for 3 more days? This was the conversation I'd been dreading. Eleanor wasn't just a victim of Michael's fraud. She was a victim of my investigation tactics. I'd watched her suffer while building a case instead of immediately explaining what was happening. I needed evidence that would stick in court. Michael's been planning this for months. If I'd confronted him directly,
He would have destroyed the proof and tried again later. So you used me as bait. I protected you while gathering evidence to protect us both permanently. Eleanor's anger was colder than Michael's fraud. You treated me like I couldn't handle the truth, just like Michael treated me like I couldn't handle independence. She was right. I'd been so focused on winning the legal chess match that I'd forgotten Eleanor was my partner, not my responsibility. She deserved to know what was happening and help decide how to respond. You're right. I should have told you immediately. Yes, you should have. That afternoon, Catherine arrived with a folder thick enough to choke a horse.
Bank records, trust documents, criminal charges, asset protection orders, and a civil lawsuit seeking damages for elder abuse, fraud, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Michael's looking at 2 to 5 years in state prison, plus federal charges for wire fraud related to the gambling debt. Jessica will lose her nursing license and face professional sanctions. Thomas Bradley's law firm is being investigated by the state bar for ethics violations. The financial damages were staggering. Michael's fraud attempt had triggered automatic penalty clauses in our trust documents, forfeiting any inheritance rights. The legal fees would exceed $60,000. The property damage from utility tampering required professional restoration. The emotional distress couldn't be calculated in dollars. But the most devastating consequence was what Eleanor said next. I want them to understand what they did to us, not just the money or the legal problems. They made me believe I was losing my mind. Catherine explained the criminal court process. Michael and Jessica would be released on bail within 48 hours. Trial dates would be set within 6 months. Restitution orders would require them to pay all damages, legal fees, and punitive penalties. The good news is the evidence is overwhelming. Michael created a paper trail that reads like a how-to manual for elder abuse fraud. The bad news is family relationships rarely survive this kind of betrayal. Eleanor asked the question I'd been avoiding. What happens to Michael when he gets out of jail? Those gambling debts don't disappear because he's in prison. The people Michael owed money to weren't going to accept "my parents had me arrested" as an excuse for non-payment. They'd been monitoring his progress toward liquidating our assets. Now they'd know their investment was worthless. He'll have to declare bankruptcy, lose his house, probably relocate somewhere cheaper and start over, Catherine said. Jessica will need to find work outside healthcare. They're looking at years of financial struggle. I felt something I hadn't expected. Guilt. Michael deserved consequences for what he'd done, but he was still my son. The boy I'd taught to ride a bicycle and throw a baseball and balance a checkbook. Somewhere in the process of building my business empire, I'd failed to teach him the most important lesson. Family loyalty can't be purchased with stolen money. Eleanor was watching my face. You're already feeling sorry for him. Shouldn't I? Feel sorry for the choices he made, not the consequences he's facing. That night, we slept in our own bed in our own house, with full water pressure and our dignity intact. But something had changed between Eleanor and me. She'd seen that I could be calculating and manipulative when protecting our interests. I'd seen that she was stronger and more perceptive than I'd given her credit for. Michael spent his first night in Maricopa County Jail. Jessica stayed with her sister in Tempe. Their marriage probably wouldn't survive the legal proceedings. Justice felt emptier than I'd expected. The local news picked up the story Tuesday morning. Scottsdale Sun arrested for elder abuse scheme ran on 3 Phoenix television stations and the Arizona Republic website. By Wednesday, Michael's face was recognizable throughout the valley. His employer, a digital marketing agency in Tempe, fired him before he posted bail. Jessica's nursing supervisor placed her on administrative leave pending completion of criminal proceedings. Their landlord began eviction proceedings, citing the criminal charges as violation of lease terms. Michael called our house Thursday evening from a payphone outside the county jail. Eleanor answered. "Mom, I need help. I can't find a job with these charges pending. Jessica's family won't help us. We don't have money for rent or legal fees. You should have thought about that before you tried to have us declared incompetent." I was desperate. The people I owe money to, they're not patient. They were threatening to hurt Jessica. Eleanor's voice stayed calm. So you decided to hurt us instead. The conversation lasted 18 minutes. Michael explained his gambling addiction, the escalating debt,
The pressure from creditors who'd tracked down our address and threatened to visit if payments didn't arrive soon. He'd convinced himself that assisted living would be better for us anyway, that we were too old to manage a large house safely. I told myself I was helping everyone. You'd get professional care, I'd get enough money to pay off the debt, and we'd all be safe. By torturing me with dehydration and making me think I had dementia? That wasn't supposed to happen. I just wanted to reduce the water pressure enough to create minor inconveniences that would support the assisted living recommendation. Eleanor hung up. Friday morning brought a visit from two men in expensive suits who didn't identify themselves clearly. They asked for Michael by name, seemed surprised to learn he was in jail, and left business cards with only phone numbers printed on them. I called Detective Chen immediately. She confirmed what I suspected. Michael's creditors were escalating their collection efforts now that his family plan had failed. These people don't respect property law or court orders, Detective Chen explained. Michael borrowed money from organizations that solve payment problems through intimidation and violence. You and Mrs. Patterson could be at risk as long as the debt exists. We hired private security for our house. 2 former Phoenix police officers, armed and licensed, worked 12-hour shifts keeping watch over our property. The cost was $300 per day, but our safety was worth more than money. Eleanor started having nightmares. Not about Michael or the gambling creditors, but about the 3 weeks she'd believed she was losing her mental capacity. She'd wake up in the middle of the night checking faucets, making sure the water pressure was normal, confirming that her confusion had been artificially created. I keep wondering what else I've been wrong about, she told me Saturday morning over coffee. If Michael could fool me about something so basic, how do I know my judgment is reliable about anything? The psychological damage was deeper than the financial fraud. Michael hadn't just stolen money. He'd stolen Eleanor's confidence in her own mind. Sunday dinner felt strange without Michael and Jessica. For 4 years they'd joined us every week. Now the dining room felt too large, too quiet, too empty. I found myself checking my phone for messages from Michael. Not because I wanted to help him, but because 28 years of being his father doesn't disappear overnight. Even criminals have parents who remember teaching them to tie shoes and helping with homework. Eleanor noticed me checking the phone. He made his choices, James. Don't make his problems your guilt. But guilt doesn't follow logic. I'd given Michael everything he needed to succeed in life: education, connections, examples of hard work, and ethical business practices. Somehow, I'd failed to teach him that stealing from family wasn't an acceptable solution to financial problems. The house felt different now, safer but lonelier, protected but hollow. 3 weeks after the arrest, Michael called from a rehabilitation center in Tucson. He'd enrolled himself in a 90-day gambling addiction treatment program, paying for it with money borrowed from Jessica's sister. Dad, I know you have no reason to believe me, but I want you to know I understand what I did. Not just the legal stuff, but what I did to Mom's sense of reality, to your trust, to our family. His voice sounded different, quieter, less of the smooth confidence he'd inherited from years of marketing presentations. The counselors here helped me trace back how the gambling started, how the debt escalated, how I convinced myself that desperate situations justified desperate actions. I kept telling myself that assisted living really would be better for you both, that I was solving multiple problems with one solution. Eleanor was listening on the extension. Were you lying to us or lying to yourself? Both. I knew the water pressure manipulation was cruel, but I told myself it was temporary. I knew the recordings were deceptive, but I told myself they showed real concerns. I created a story where I was helping everyone while stealing from you. Michael explained the treatment program. Individual counseling twice daily, group sessions with other gambling addicts, financial planning education, family therapy preparation. The facility specialized in addiction cases involving family fraud, apparently more common than I'd realized. They want to schedule family counseling sessions, not to ask for forgiveness or try to fix everything immediately, but to understand how addiction affected my decision-making and how we might rebuild some kind of relationship eventually. Eleanor surprised me by agreeing to participate. I want to understand how you could convince yourself that torturing me was acceptable, not to forgive you, but to protect myself from trusting the wrong people in the future. Dr. Patricia Martinez, the family counselor, met with Eleanor and me first without Michael present. She explained how addiction creates moral blindness, where people can rationalize increasingly harmful behavior as necessary for survival. Michael genuinely believed his plan would help everyone, Dr. Martinez said. That doesn't excuse what he did, but it helps explain how someone with no previous history of elder abuse could orchestrate such a systematic fraud. The first joint session was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon in late December. Michael looked 20 pounds thinner, his usual cocky demeanor replaced by something that might have been genuine humility. "I want to start by acknowledging what I know, but never said out loud," he began. "I tortured Mom to steal your money and save myself from consequences of my gambling addiction. Everything else I told myself was lies to make the truth bearable." Eleanor's response was measured. "I need to know that you understand the difference between what you did and what you told yourself you were doing. I manipulated utility services to create artificial evidence of decline, recorded you during vulnerable moments to build a false case for incompetency, and planned to warehouse you in assisted living while liquidating your assets to pay my debts. I convinced myself this was family care, but it was systematic elder abuse." Dr. Martinez guided the conversation toward understanding the psychological mechanisms that had allowed Michael to rationalize such behavior. Gambling addiction creates desperation that overwhelms normal moral reasoning. Financial pressure from criminal creditors creates fear that justifies otherwise unthinkable actions. "The question isn't whether Michael is fundamentally evil," Dr. Martinez explained. "The question is whether he can develop reliable systems for making ethical decisions under pressure." By the end of the session, we'd established ground rules for future contact. Michael would complete the full 90-day program plus 6 months of outpatient counseling. Eleanor and I would maintain the protective orders and asset restrictions. Any future relationship would depend on Michael's ability to demonstrate consistent accountability for his actions. Jessica attended the second session 2 weeks later. She'd found work at a community health clinic and was living with her sister while facing her own professional sanctions. "I enabled Michael's plan because I was scared," she admitted. "I knew what we were doing was wrong, but I told myself that elderly people often need more care than they want to admit." Eleanor's response was direct. "Being scared doesn't justify participating in someone's torture? No, it doesn't. I'm not asking for forgiveness, just for you to know that I understand the harm we caused." The sessions weren't leading toward quick reconciliation, but they were creating space for honest communication about what had happened and why. 6 months after the arrests, I made a decision that Catherine strongly advised against. Michael had completed his rehabilitation program and was working as a night janitor at a community college in Tucson. Jessica had found employment at a rural clinic 2 hours away. They were living separately, trying to rebuild their individual lives before deciding whether their marriage could survive. I opened a bank account under the name JP Holdings and arranged for anonymous payments toward Michael's basic living expenses. Not enough to make him comfortable, but enough to keep him housed and fed while he worked through his recovery process. The payments were structured as rental assistance, $300 monthly deposited into an account Michael could access but couldn't trace to me. I wanted to observe how he would handle unexpected financial help when he thought no one was watching. Eleanor discovered the payments during her monthly review of our financial statements. "You're secretly helping him after everything he did to us?" "I'm testing him. If he uses anonymous money responsibly, it suggests genuine change. If he uses it to return to gambling or stops working because he has outside support, it confirms he's still manipulative. And if he tries to investigate where the money comes from, that tells us he still thinks he's entitled to family resources." For 4 months, Michael used the money exactly as intended: rent, groceries, transportation to work, and counseling appointments. He continued working full-time despite having additional income. He didn't reduce his hours or treat the money as a reason to relax his recovery efforts. More importantly, he didn't try to trace the source. Bank records showed he'd asked no questions about the mysterious rental assistance program that had appeared in his life. He simply accepted help gracefully and used it responsibly. Then I escalated the test. In month 5, I increased the payment to $800 and included a note. This assistance may become permanent for individuals demonstrating sustained recovery and ethical behavior. Michael's response revealed everything about his psychological progress. Instead of celebrating the increased income, he called the bank to ask whether the payments might be coming from family members he'd harmed. "I don't feel comfortable accepting this much help without knowing where it comes from," he told the bank representative. "If this is from people I hurt, I need to make direct amends before accepting their support." The bank representative, following my instructions, confirmed only that the payments were from a private foundation supporting addiction recovery.
Michael's next decision surprised everyone, including his counselors. He donated $500 of the $800 to a nonprofit organization serving elderly abuse victims. He kept $300 for basic expenses, the same amount he'd been receiving originally. Dr. Martinez called to discuss Michael's reaction during their counseling session. He's struggling with accepting help he hasn't earned, especially when he suspects it might be coming from victims of his fraud. That's actually a positive sign for his recovery. But the most revealing test came in month 6. I arranged for Thomas Bradley, Michael's former friend and legal co-conspirator, to contact Michael about a business opportunity. Thomas had avoided criminal charges by cooperating with prosecutors, but his law license was suspended and his practice had collapsed. The opportunity was carefully constructed, a chance to make $50,000 by providing consulting services to families seeking compassionate assisted living transitions for elderly relatives. Essentially the same kind of elder abuse fraud Michael had attempted against us, but positioned as legitimate business consulting. Thomas explained that families often needed help recognizing when parents require professional care, and that Michael's experience with family dynamics around aging made him valuable as a consultant. I watched through surveillance equipment as Thomas presented this offer in a coffee shop near Michael's workplace. Michael listened for 20 minutes before responding. "Thomas, what you're describing is exactly what I did to my parents. It was fraud then, and it's fraud now. I'm not interested in helping other families manipulate elderly relatives, no matter how you frame it. Michael, this is $50,000 for 6 weeks of work. You're living in a studio apartment and working as a janitor. This could restart your career. My career isn't worth more than other people's dignity. I spent months torturing my mother to steal money from my parents. I'm not going to help other people do the same thing to their families." Thomas pressed harder, suggesting that Michael was being overly rigid about ethical boundaries and that smart business sometimes requires moral flexibility. Michael's final response was recorded clearly. "The last time I practiced moral flexibility, I destroyed my family and nearly sent my wife to prison. I'd rather clean bathrooms for minimum wage than make money by helping people abuse their parents." After Thomas left, Michael called Dr. Martinez to report the meeting and ask whether he should notify authorities about Thomas's continued involvement in elder abuse schemes. That evening, I called Eleanor from my office and played the entire recorded conversation. "He passed," she said simply. "What does that mean for us?" "It means he's learned the difference between desperate choices and ethical choices. It doesn't erase what he did, but it suggests he might be capable of sustained change." The anonymous payments had revealed something crucial. Michael was developing genuine moral boundaries that held even under financial pressure. He was choosing ethical behavior over easy money, transparency over manipulation, accountability over entitlement. But passing one test doesn't rebuild trust destroyed by months of systematic betrayal. Eleanor and I still maintained all protective legal measures. Michael still had no access to our assets or inheritance. The restraining orders remained in effect. "Trust," Eleanor said, "isn't binary. It's not fully present or completely absent. It's rebuilt gradually through consistent behavior over time." Michael had demonstrated he could make ethical choices when tested. The question now was whether he could sustain those choices long enough to earn consideration for limited family reconciliation. 18 months after the arrests, we held our first family meeting in Catherine's conference room. Not a social gathering or emotional reconciliation, but a business-like discussion of terms and conditions for possible future contact. Michael looked different. The weight loss from rehabilitation had been replaced by muscle from physical work. His clothes were clean but modest work boots, Levi's, a button-down shirt from Target rather than the designer brands he'd favored during his marketing career. He'd grown a beard that made him look older, more serious. Jessica attended separately. Their marriage had ended 6 months earlier,
amicably but definitively. She was pursuing certification as a physician's assistant in rural medicine, specializing in elderly care. Her professional sanctions would be lifted after completing additional ethics training and community service at senior living facilities. I want to start by acknowledging that nothing I say changes what I did, Michael began. I systematically abused Mom to steal from both of you. I violated your trust, damaged your sense of security in your own home, and created trauma that can't be undone by apologies. Eleanor's response was measured. We appreciate your acknowledgement, but we're here to discuss practical matters, not emotional processing. Catherine had prepared a written agreement outlining the terms under which limited family contact might be possible. The conditions were extensive and non-negotiable. Michael would continue gambling addiction counseling indefinitely, with quarterly progress reports submitted to our attorney. Any relapse would terminate all contact permanently. He would maintain steady employment for at least 2 years before consideration for increased contact. Financial records would be reviewed quarterly to ensure he wasn't accumulating debt or engaging in high-risk behaviors. All communication would occur through supervised channels for the first year. Phone calls scheduled in advance, meetings in public places with time limits, no unexpected visits to our home. Michael would pay restitution for legal fees, property damage, and counseling costs at $50 monthly until the debt was satisfied. The total amount was $47,000, representing approximately 20 years of payments at his current income level. Most importantly, Michael would have no inheritance rights and no access to information about our financial affairs. Any attempts to discuss money, property, or estate planning would result in immediate termination of contact. These terms are designed to test whether you can maintain a relationship with us that isn't motivated by financial interest, Catherine explained. If you can build genuine connection without access to our assets, it suggests authentic change. Michael reviewed the agreement carefully before signing. I understand these conditions, and I accept them. I also want to add something that isn't required but feels necessary to me. He pulled out a handwritten letter. I've written detailed accounts of exactly what I did during those 3 weeks, how I planned it, and why I made each decision. I want you to have this not for legal purposes, but so you can understand the specific methods I used and protect yourselves if anyone else tries similar tactics. The letter was 8 pages long, typed and detailed. It read like a confession combined with a security manual. Michael had documented every aspect of his fraud, how to manipulate utility valves, how to create false evidence of cognitive decline, how to research assisted living facilities, how to recruit professional allies like Thomas Bradley. Why are you giving us this? Eleanor asked. Because elder abuse tactics are becoming more sophisticated, and families need to know how these schemes work. What I did to you, other people are doing to other families. This information might help you recognize similar patterns if anyone else approaches you with concerned suggestions about your living situation. Eleanor spent 30 minutes reading the confession while Michael and I sat in uncomfortable silence. Finally, she looked up. This is the first thing you've done that actually serves our interests instead of your own. We agreed to begin with 1 supervised phone call monthly, progressing to quarterly lunch meetings after 6 months of consistent behavior. Contact with our grandchildren. Jessica's nieces and nephews, who had become part of our extended family, would be separate discussions based on their parents' comfort levels. Michael's first question after signing the agreement was about Eleanor's hip recovery. How is your physical therapy going? Are you still using the walker? I graduated to a cane 3 months ago. I can walk 2 miles daily now. I'm glad. I know the fear and pain I caused interfered with your healing process. The conversation lasted exactly the agreed-upon 60 minutes. Professional, cordial, carefully monitored, not warm, but not hostile, a beginning rather than a reconciliation. After Michael left, Eleanor and I reviewed the terms with Catherine once more. These conditions are designed to last several years, Catherine explained. If Michael can maintain ethical behavior, steady employment, and respectful communication for that long, you'll have evidence of sustained change. If he can't, the protective measures remain in place indefinitely. Eleanor had one final question. What if he succeeds? What if he meets every condition and demonstrates genuine change? What then? Then you'll decide whether to trust him with limited access to your lives, Catherine said. But trust doesn't mean returning to previous relationships.
It means creating new relationships with appropriate boundaries. The drive home was quiet. We'd taken the first step toward possible reconciliation, but we'd also formalized the reality that our family would never return to what it had been before Michael's betrayal. Some fractures heal stronger than the original structure. Others heal functional but forever changed. 2 years later, Michael arrived at our house for his first supervised home visit. Eleanor opened the door while I watched from the kitchen window, ready to call security if anything felt unsafe. He carried a small toolbox and a bag from Home Depot. "I noticed last time that the front sprinkler head was broken. I thought I could fix it, if that's okay with you." Eleanor considered the request. "You can work on it, but I'm watching." For 2 hours, Michael repaired sprinkler heads, cleaned gutters, and replaced weather stripping around the front door. Work he'd observed me doing countless times during his childhood but had never offered to help with as an adult. He didn't ask to come inside. He didn't mention money or inheritance or his ongoing financial struggles. He simply did maintenance work that needed doing and left when it was finished. "Same time next month?" he asked before leaving. "If your counseling reports remain positive," Eleanor replied. After he left, Eleanor and I walked through the yard checking his work. Everything was repaired correctly. Tools cleaned and organized, no damage or shortcuts. The kind of careful attention to detail that suggested respect for our property rather than entitlement to it. "He's different," Eleanor said. "Different enough?" "Different enough to continue these supervised visits. Not different enough for unsupervised access to our lives." 6 months later, Michael brought someone with him. Dr. Martinez, his counselor, had requested permission to observe his behavior during family interaction. "Michael has made significant progress in developing ethical decision-making skills," she explained. "But the real test is whether he can maintain those skills under the stress of family relationships." That afternoon, Michael helped Eleanor reorganize her craft room while I updated the irrigation system timer. Normal family maintenance activities, but performed under clinical observation to assess his psychological development. Dr. Martinez noted that Michael consistently deferred to Eleanor's preferences, asked permission before moving her belongings, and showed genuine interest in her hobbies without trying to control or manipulate the conversation. 2 years ago, Michael couldn't have spent 3 hours focused on other people's needs without calculating what he might gain from the interaction, Dr. Martinez told us privately. Today he seems genuinely interested in being helpful without expecting anything in return. But the most important change was Eleanor's comfort level. She'd begun to relax during Michael's visits, treating him more like a responsible adult relative and less like a potential threat. The legal protections remained fully in place. Our trust documents still excluded Michael from inheritance rights. The restraining order was modified to allow supervised visits but maintained restrictions on unsupervised contact. Our assets remained completely protected from any future manipulation. Catherine updated our estate planning documents to include what she called earned forgiveness provisions. If Michael maintained ethical behavior and steady employment for 5 consecutive years, he would become eligible for a small annual gift. Not an inheritance, but recognition of sustained change. "The money isn't the point," Catherine explained. "The point is creating incentives for long-term ethical behavior while maintaining protection against future fraud." Today, 3 years after his arrests, Michael works as a maintenance supervisor at a senior living community in Phoenix. He's been promoted twice based on his reliability and his unusual sensitivity to elderly residents' dignity and autonomy. Eleanor and I visit the facility occasionally, not to check on Michael, but because we've become volunteers in their garden program. Michael introduced us to residents who remind us of ourselves, independent people adjusting to increased care needs without losing their sense of self-worth. The irony isn't lost on any of us. Michael spent months trying to force us into assisted living to steal our money. Now he works to ensure that other families' transitions to senior care are voluntary, respectful, and transparent. He's become the person he should have been before desperation corrupted his judgment. Some families survive betrayal through forgiveness. Others survive through accountability. We chose accountability that made forgiveness possible, but only on terms that protect everyone involved. Love doesn't mean accepting abuse. Family doesn't mean unlimited trust. And second chances must be earned through sustained change, not granted through sentiment. Our family relationships will never return to what they were before Michael's fraud, but they've evolved into something more honest, more careful, and perhaps more durable. Trust, once broken, rebuilds differently than it was originally constructed, sometimes stronger, always more aware of what can be lost.